So let's begin with today's lecture. So in last lecture, we have concluded with the first unit of our syllabus, that is study of phyla. Today we are going to start with the next unit from our syllabus, that is study of Calotes versicolor. So in today's introductory session, we are going to study the systematic position, habitat, and external characters of Calotes versicolor. So this animal, Calotes, you must be aware of. Okay, before going into today's lecture, let's take a brief recap of previous lecture. So in last lecture, we studied the male reproductive system, followed by the female reproductive system of phyla. Then we understood the mechanism of copulation as well as fertilization and the further course of development in phyla. So session objective for today's lecture will be systematic position of Calotes versicolor with regions, geographical distribution of the Calotes. Then we'll see the study habit and habitat of Calotes versicolor. And finally, we'll study the external morphology of Calotes. So this Calotes versicolor, you must have seen in and around your house or at many other places. So this Calotes versicolor, which is commonly called as garden lizard. In Hindi, it is called as girgit, or in Marathi we call it as sarda. And it is present in most of the areas where the insect or other food material for this animal is available. So let's first study the systematic position of garden lizard. So first of all, you must be knowing that garden lizard or the Calotes belongs to reptilia. It is basically a reptile. So let's start with phylum. So the phylum of Calotes is Chordata. What do you understand by the literal meaning of Chordata? That is, notochord is present in the embryonic stage. Okay, so in the embryonic stage, since notochord is present, we are classifying these Calotes in the phylum Chordata. Next, the subphylum is Vertebrata. Later on, when it develops, this notochord is replaced by vertebral column, right? So it has the nerve cord as well as notochord. This notochord is replaced by the vertebral column and skull is present. That's why we classify it in the subphylum Vertebrata. Then comes the infraphylum. So it belongs to the infraphylum or division, that is Gnathostomata. So what is meant by gnathos? Means jaws. So they are the organism which presents the true jaws. So two jaws are present in their body near which border their mouth. Now they belong to superclass Tetrapoda. So what is the meaning of Tetrapoda? Tetra means four and podos means limbs or legs.
Limbs.
Yes. So they have four limbs. That's why we classify them into tetrapods. Then comes the class Reptilia. What is the peculiar feature of reptiles? They have the exoskeleton, which is made up of horny epidermal scales. So which is very rough, and scales are present throughout the body surface. Now they are classified into subclass Diapsida. So we know that there are openings or fossae in the skull. So based on this, we are going to study different types of skull in our final chapter. So they belong to a group or subclass, that is Diapsida, where the skull has these two fossae. Now they belong to order Squamata. So what do you mean by Squamata? They have the cloacal aperture which is present in the transverse position, as well as they have the presence of copulatory organ for the copulation. Now they belong to suborder Lacertilia. Why we are classifying them into Lacertilia? Because they have presence of limbs, that is forelimbs and hind limbs. Eyelids are present, tympanum is present, sternum and episternum. So you must have studied their skeleton. In that sternum bone you have come across in the thoracic region where the ribs are attached, right? So here the sternum and episternum are well developed, as well as they show the presence of limbs, eyelid and tympanum. That's why we classify them into suborder Lacertilia. Now we classify them into family Agamidae. So what are the features of family Agamidae? We'll see in the next slide. We classify them into genus Calotes and species is versicolor. Now there are more than 30 species of the genus Calotes. Okay, so we are classifying them into family Agamidae. So these are the features which are present in Calotes. That's why we are classifying them into Agamidae. First of all, they have movable eyelids. Okay, so this is a peculiar feature that their eyelids can move. The shape of the eye pupil is round. Okay, then they have the dorsal scale which are imbricate. Okay, so I will show you the picture I will share some notes in that you will find these imbricate types of scales. So if you have observed a Calotes from closer look, you must have seen the overlapping scales. So those are nothing but the imbricate type of scales. Now head has unsymmetrical scales on the top, tongue is broad, short and thick, and they have what is called as acrodon type of teeth. So all these features are present in Calotes. That's why we are classifying it into family Agamidae. Okay, now we are classifying it into the genus Calotes because it has compressed body. So body is dorsolaterally compressed. It has presence of dorsal crest. I will show you in the picture. It has dorsal scales which are uniform and regular. First of all, the body of animal is divided into dorsal surface and ventral surface. It has presence of gular sacs. So what are these gular sacs? I will show in the picture. They have naked tympanum, tail is long and slender, and tail of male is usually swollen and round at the base. So all these are the features of genus Calotes. Okay, so in this picture you can see a typical Calotes versicolor in which you have the imbricate type of scales all throughout the body. You have this ventral crest. So you have some crest which is present on the the dorsal side of the body. Then you have the eyes which are laterally positioned. So one eye on this side, on that side you have the second eye. This is called as a tympanum. And the body or the tail is quite longer. So we are going to study the divisions of the body in next part. Okay, so in all there are around 27 species of these genus Calotes has, and out of them we are going to stick to only one species, that is versicolor. Okay, so why it is classified into species versicolor? Because body color is gray to brown in color, and scales of the body are present on sides of the body pointing upward as well as backwards, and it shows pair of conspicuous spines present above the tympanum on each side. Now let's come to the geographical distribution. So all over the world, where do you find Calotes? So Calotes is basically found in the Indian subcontinent. So in Indian subcontinent, you can find it in countries like India, Pakistan, Bangladesh, southern China, Malaysia and Sri Lanka. Okay, so this is a species of Indian subcontinent. Now, what is the habitat? They prefer, we call them as a garden lizard. So they prefer to live in the gardens because their food is abundant in gardens, but not only in gardens, wherever in the forest. Basically, they prefer grassland or plain areas. Wherever the insect and other food population is higher, they are found in the abundant number. Okay, we come to the habit and habitat of Calotes. First of all, it is an arboreal lizard. That means it lives onto the terrestrial areas. So you find them commonly into the agricultural fields or gardens. They are diurnal. What do you mean by diurnal? They are most active during the daytime. So for their foraging, that means for collection of the food or other activities like mating and all, that is all done in the daytime. That's why they are most active in the daytime, so diurnal. They are insectivorous. They feed onto the small insect, even other small lizards, small frogs, crabs, and even earthworms. So this is their food preference. And you must have seen these calotes lying steady without moving on the twigs of the trees or even rocks. And sometimes you must have seen it running very fast onto the ground. So it can run as well as it can swim if there is any predator present nearby. Now the sexes are separate, so you have a separate male and a female. However, the sexual dimorphism is indistinct. That means you cannot easily identify a male Calotes and a female Calotes from external body characters. Okay. And there, as we have seen their distribution, they are widely found in the Indian subcontinent, most common in the India and southern China. Okay, now we come to the final point of today's discussion, their external morphology of Calotes or garden lizard. So how is the shape? The body is very elongated, slender, and basically divided into 4 body parts, that is head, neck, trunk, and tail. Now, if we see, the males are brightly colored. Sometimes they show the golden yellow or greenish tinge to the body. So they have this characteristic, they can change their color, which is a very characteristic feature of the Calotes or many species of the Calotes. Now throat, if you see, they have a typical throat which is scarlet red in color, and there are often presence of the transverse black bars which are present on this throat. However, female is not so brightly colored. Males are only brightly colored. So this is one feature you can make out a male from a female Calotes. Another feature is male is larger and stronger than female, right? So they can measure up to 35 centimeter, including the tail. Now, if you see a Calotes, their tail is very large. Sometimes even the tail is larger than the body size. Okay, so in this picture, we can see different body parts of a Calotes. So a round eye pupil, eyes are present laterally. So they do not have binocular vision. They have the monocular vision, because in higher organism, you have the binocular vision. Here, since eyes are laterally positioned, they only have monocular vision. You have this nostril, mouth, then you have this crest. So you have a mid-dorsal crest of spines. You have this external ear. So you have this opening that is called as tympanum. Now, if we divide the body, this is the head. There is a very short tail. Sorry, there is a very short neck. You have this portion of the body which is called as a trunk. So from neck to the start of the tip of or the start of the tail, this region is called as trunk, and then you have a long prehensile tail. Okay, now on this body, it is entirely covered with these imbricate type of scales. So these overlapping type of scales are present. They have a 2 pair of limbs. This is forelimb and this is hind limb. Further, we are going to study them in detail. Okay, so from this picture, at least you should understand the basic part, that is head, short neck, then you have a trunk, and then a long tail, and a 2 pair of limbs, that is forelimb and hind limb. Okay, so let's start with the external morphology. So the body of Calotes is divided into head, trunk and tail. And in between head and trunk there is a short neck. So if we see the head, which is triangular in shape and slightly depressed. So from upper side you can see it is slightly depressed in appearance. So this anterior blunt end of the head is also called as snout. So in this picture you can see this tapering portion of the mouth is called as a snout. Snout is short, pointed, bears a pair of aperture which are called as external nares. So in this picture, you can see in this region they have the pair of apertures which are called as a external nares. Eyes, as I told you, they are present laterally, so they have a monocular vision, and in eyes they have the movable nictitating membrane. You must have heard this name, nictitating membrane, which is a vestigial organ in higher organisms like humans. However, it is well developed in case of Calotes. Mouth is transverse aperture, so it is a slit-like opening on the snout part of the head. Posterior region of the head and tympanum possess a pair of spines. So in this region also you can have the presence of spines between the neck and this tympanum region. Now these spines, this is a typical characteristic feature to identify a Calotes, and whole surface of the head is covered with scales. Even the tail has the presence of scales. This is a peculiar feature, that even the tail has the scales. Okay, now we come to the second part of the body. After head comes the neck. The neck is fairly short and not distinct from externally. So from outside, you cannot make out a neck. But if you see the skeleton of the Calotes, a well-developed neck can be seen in the skeleton bones of the Calotes. So small narrow neck joins the head with the trunk region, and it is well formed internally. As I told you, if you see the axial skeleton of the Calotes, the bones of the neck are very well formed. What is the function of neck? It helps in the movement of head in a limited range. Okay, so it cannot move it like in 360 degrees, but it can move to both the side so that it can visualize its surrounding. So we can say that neck is the connecting region between head and trunk. Okay, so very simple. Neck is a connecting region between head and trunk, not distinct from outside. If you study the skeleton, it is well developed. So here, though you can externally cannot make out, but in this region, neck is connecting the head with the trunk. Okay, now we come to the second part of the body, this portion which we are calling it as trunk. So trunk of Calotes is cylindrical in form and slightly compressed laterally. So from both the sides, it is compressed body. So it is dorsolaterally compressed as well as it is flat from ventral side. And trunk further is divided into two regions, anterior small region, snout, thorax, and the posterior large region which consists of the abdomen. So in this anterior region, you have the presence of the thoracic region, and the posterior region, you have the presence of abdomen. Now, at the junction of tail and trunk, you have the presence of cloacal aperture. So in this picture, you can see the trunk ends here and the tail starts here. So at the junction of these two, you have a small opening that is called as cloacal opening or cloacal aperture. Okay. Now, trunk bears two pair of limbs. As I already told you, there are two pair of limbs, one pair of forelimb and one pair of hind limbs. So this is one pair of forelimbs and one pair of hind limbs. Now let's study forelimbs. The frontal limbs, which are called as forelimbs, they are shorter than the hind limbs. So they are shorter as well as slender. If you compare their size, these are much broader, and the forelimbs are which are slender, as well as if you compare their length, forelimbs are shorter than the hind limbs. They arise just behind the neck. So where the neck ends, from that point you have the development of these forelimbs. Proximal upper part is called as brachium. Okay, so this upper part is called as a brachium. Then you have the second part of the forelimb called as a antebrachium. Then you have this palm region, which is also called as hand, or it is also called as manus. Now this hand comprises of short wrist. You must have heard this name, carpals, metacarpals. So here in the wrist you have the presence of carpals, and the palm, it should not be metatarsal, but it should be metacarpals. There are 5 slender toes or digits, that is fingers. Like in higher organism we call them as fingers. In these organisms we call them as digits, and each digit has, or it ends into a pointed claw. So we know that they are carnivorous animal, so they require a very sharp claws. So at the tip of the fingers, or these, what we call them as the digits, they have the very well developed claws. Okay, so I hope you have understood the position of the forelimb. What are the parts? Brachium is this region, antebrachium. Then you have a palm on which you have 5 digits. You have the carpals and metacarpals, and each of this finger or digit ends into a claw. So this is all about forelimbs. We come to the next part of the body, that is hind limbs. So here, where the trunk ends and the tail starts, you have the position of hind limbs. So in this hind limbs, you have this thigh region and shank region, followed by the foot, and you have the toes. So here, like we have called it as brachium and antebrachium, you have this thigh region, and followed by you have the shank region. This is called as shank region. Then you have the presence of foot, which also has 5 digits, and these 5 digits end into the claw at the tip. Okay, so both the forelimb as well as hind limb have the fingers or digits which ends into the claws, which are very sharp. Okay, so the hind limbs arise, we have understood the position. They consist of 3 parts, that is thigh, which is also called as femur. Middle region is called as a shank. Shank is also referred by another name, that is crus, and the distal part of the hind limb is called as foot. Okay, so thigh, shank and foot, or femur, crus and foot. Now the hand comprises of short wrist, which is called as a tarsus. Instead of carpus, it should be tarsus, and further it made up of metatarsus, and there are 5 slender toes. Okay, so there are 5 digits which are also referred to as toes, and each digit, if you see compare the size of each digit, is one of them is variable in size. So they are not uniform in size, like your fingers, they are not uniform in size. And if you see, the hind limbs are pentadactyl. What is meant by pentadactyl? They have 5 digits or fingers, and 4th digit or 4th finger is longer than the others. So here you can see there is 1 digit which is extreme or more longer in size compared to the remaining 4. So the 4th digit is the longest digit or finger, and they are pentadactyl hind limbs. Now we come to the last part of body, that is tail. The tail is the posterior most part of the body. It is cylindrical and tapering at the end. tail is long, slender and tapering, right? So if you see in the picture, the tail is almost longer than the body size, and as we go to the tip, it goes on tapering. That means it becomes smaller in the width. Okay. Lastly, it measures twice as long as the head and the body. So whatever is the body size, the tail is twice the length of the body size. And in adult Calotes, it can grow up to 23 centimeters. So the tail can measure up to 23 centimeters in adult Calotes. And as I already told you, that tail is covered by the scales. Okay, so tail is also covered by the scale. So along with this tail, males measure 120 to 140 millimeter from snout to vent with a tail of 300 to 500 millimeter. Okay. So in this picture, from this snout to this vent or this end of the trunk region, the length is hardly 150 to 200 millimeter, but the length of the tail is more than 2 times or around 2 times this size of the from snout to the end of the trunk. Okay, so this is all about the external morphology of the Calotes versicolor. I'll quickly go through or will summarize today's lecture. So we have understood the classification of the garden lizard, what are the reasons for each level of organization. So they have the notochord, but this is present only in the embryonic stage. Later on, notochord is replaced in the adult by the vertebral column. So that's why we are classifying them into vertebrates. And then we understood the reason for each character and why we have classified them systematically. Then we have studied the reasons for why we are classifying them into Agamidae, into the genus Calotes. What are the external body features? There are around 27 species of Calotes, and out of them we are studying the Calotes versicolor. Then their geographical distribution in the Indian subcontinent, their habitat, they prefer to live in the grassland, gardens or in the forest. They prefer the plain areas, bushes, wherever the bushes and food are present, they live to prefer that area. We understood the habitat of these animals, their behavior, diurnal in nature, insectivorous. It is very difficult to identify the male and female from the sexual dimorphism or external morphology. Then we understood their shape, size and color. The males are more brightly colored than the females. We have understood the external morphology. Body is divided into head, neck, trunk and the tail. Tail is the largest part of the body. We understood the characteristics of the head. Then we understood neck, though it is not very distinct from the externally, but in the skeleton neck is well developed. Neck is the connecting region between the head and trunk. Then understood the trunk, which bears 2 pair of appendages, that is forelimbs and hind limbs. There is an aperture at the junction between the trunk and a tail. We call it as cloacal aperture. We will understood this when we'll study what is the function of this cloacal aperture, when we'll study this other systems. Then we understood forelimbs. The forelimb are made up of brachium, antebrachium, then the palm and the digits, which are clawed. Then the hind limbs, which are made up of the thigh, shank, and the palm, which comprises of tarsals and metatarsals, which end into the clawed toes. And finally, we studied the tail, which is the largest part of the body, and in adult these Calotes, they can even measure up to 23 centimeter. They can be twice as longer than the body size from snout to the tip of the trunk. So with this, we conclude today's lecture.